Okay. Marco, hello. Hello. Luca, Nadine, Gonzalo, Paul, David. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today is going to be a little bit different than the other weeks. If you could mute your mic for now, because I have some noise on my headphones. Don't know who this is. Okay, please all mute your mic. And today, if possible, I want to see as many faces as possible. I know it's early, it's Monday morning. I'm also going to ask some of you to read out their answers for the assignments, because that's what today's class is about. Most of you have done the assignments, that's why I just registered your name so I know who's there. And not coincidentally, most of you have made the assignments. For the people who haven't done them and who are speaking to colleagues that have not done the assignments, please make sure to do that, because you're enrolled in a full program, which means that you are expected to take also these classes. Obviously, I hope you will get inspired, you learn new things. But even if you don't, then make sure to be a disciplined student. I know these are all very challenging times that we live in at the moment. But if you cannot make it, or if you cannot do the assignment for whatever reason, then please let me know. So communicate, because it's really difficult for me to keep track of everyone. And this is a way also making the assignments of making sure that everyone is involved. And I think in general there could be more involvement. So again, most of you have done the assignments, but for those who haven't, please do so, because this is just part of your full program. And again, if you cannot make it or whatever, I understand that we are living in quite challenging times. But this is also the case for the teachers. So we make an effort to adapt our teaching as much as we can, to make it available online, to teach from our home situations. And if we do not get the response back, then that's also very demotivating for the teachers. So please do the assignments, be involved. I still hear quite some noise. Has everyone muted their mic? Can you please check? Is that me? Just gonna see. No, there must be someone else. Do you have the same noise over your computers? No, don't hear any noise. Maybe it's my headphones then. All right, I'm just gonna do it like this. Okay, is there anyone who wants to show their face, turn their camera on? Yes. Hello, Paul. Today is for me the day to also see some faces. It would be so nice because I'm always talking to my computer. Yes, hello, Felix. Thank you. Are you? Hello. Great. So again, today the session is going to last until 10 o'clock. You've been listening to some music, and I want it to be a little bit more interactive than the other weeks where I've just been basically talking to you. Paul, if we go to you've listened to 5 recordings, so we have, let's say, about 10 minutes for each recording. So if we go to the first recording, the Maple Leaf Wreck by Scott Joplin, I ask you to listen to the form, and not just to define the form, but also to think what it means. Also, when we think about jazz standards, we basically think about repertoire that was formed in the 20s and the 30s. And what hopefully you noticed listening to these early examples is that the form is usually not as clear or AABA structure as in the 20s and 30s in the standards. So, Paul, can I ask you, what was your form? What did you have?
To be honest, I don't have it in front of me, but I can remember what I wrote down is that I heard a sort of structure, but when it was repeated, I remembered it was like double time, so A, A, B, B, but the second time it was played, it was a little bit different ending. So I think I had like A and then A accent and then B, B accent. And then eventually it was coming to a C, I think, and then back to one time B and then A again, something like that. I can't remember it by heart, but something like that.
And Felix, what did you have?
Kind of the same. I wrote down that I have 2 parts of A. And
how long was A in your case?
1 A part is 16 bars.
So you took 2/4 as a measure?
Yes.
Or so it depends whether you count it in 4 or in 2, whether it's 16 or 8 bars. So some people had 8 bars, but they were counting faster. Yeah, okay.
Then I have 2 B parts. And then it's the same for me. I don't remember the tune as well. But then I wrote down 1 A part.
Yeah.
And then one kind of variation. So I wrote down C.
Yeah.
Yeah. Up to the end, I guess.
Was there anyone else who had something different than that? Because at the beginning you're quite right. So it's A accent. You could do A accent. B A, and then is there anyone else who wants to give his or her answer? Antonio, hello, good morning.
Hello, Luz. Hi, good morning. In my case, I have like 2 A's, A, B, then A again, C, and D.
Yeah, that's it. Right? So that's pretty much the form. What you can also think of is the sort of differences you probably heard in the C part, the modulation, going from A flat. Well, you may not have heard that it was A flat major, but that it went to D flat major. Some strong steady chords in the left hand, so really ragtime, syncopations in the right hand, short arpeggiated phrases. So these are all sort of musical characteristics that you may have identified in the ragtime. And as we will see in the other examples, it's also it's a bit more fixed. This was actually played by Scott Joplin, but on a piano roll. So it was reserved on a pianola roll, like the little music boxes, but then big and in a piano. So that's why it may sound a little bit off in terms of timing, but that's also dependent on the speed that the roll is played on. Also, it was recorded or registered the roll at the end of his life, and he was apparently quite ill already then. But at least we have some idea of how Scott Joplin himself would have played this rag, and that's quite unique in that time. All right, so this was quite a short assignment, but please note that form was not by no means a sort of fixed thing, and there was a lot of variation. All right, is there anyone who wants to share his or her answer? Because they're not quite right, or not sure whether they gave the right answer. C was only 16 bars. It's not 2 times C. It's only 1 time. So it's A, B, B, A, C, D, D. And then depending on how strict you are, the second repetitions are always with an accent because they're have slightly different endings. And someone noted that also you could make an accent because the timing is a little bit different, but we're listening to form mainly. So it depends also on your arguments. Right, let's go to the second, to the blues questions. You have listened to 2 different types of blues performances. The first recording was from 1920 by Mamie Smith, and the other one was Empty Bed Blues, with quite suggestive sexual lyrics. I don't know if you have listened to the lyrics. You're jazz musicians, so not all of you, if you have my genes, then the lyrics are not on the top of the priority list, but do listen to Empty Bed Blues lyrics, and you can guess what a coffee grinder means. And to grind my coffee, it's something common to sort of African American culture, where you have a principle called double consciousness. My video is highlighted. Where there's always different meanings to certain texts. So in terms of, in the case of Empty Bed Blues, there's sort of implicit but almost explicit sexual references. And this was also part of that sort of practices. Usually you would have a literal meaning and then the sexual content. Right. If Zhao, I can see you. What did you have in terms of the first of Crazy Blues? The form. How would you describe the form?
I can read it to you.
Yeah?
As I wrote it.
Sure.
I wrote that's a 12-bar blues with simple changes, and in the last 4 bars there's a 5 to sharp 5 back to 5 change again. So instead of a 2-5-1 to 1 again.
And is it a 12-bar blues every chorus?
Oh, maybe not. I actually didn't count every chorus. Maybe I counted like the first and the second one and then the last one. I don't really remember.
Okay, was the first chorus a 12-bar blues?
I remember counting it like that, so maybe I'm wrong.
Okay.
What I wrote down is that it was alternating between a 12 and a 16 bar, but I can't remember if it's correct or...
Yeah. Is there anyone else who wants to say there is indeed 12-bar blues and 16-bar form, or perhaps blues if you want to call it that? How many choruses?
I didn't count them.
Who can tell? Who wants to say how many choruses he or she had?
It's possible that there are 6 choruses.
6? Yes. That's right. Intro or no intro?
There's 4 bars. Intro.
4-bar intro? Yes, absolutely. So we already know we have 4-bar intro, then we have 6 choruses, of which some of them are 16 bars, some of them are 12 bars. And then there's a short little phrase at the end of the tune, or coda or cadence, whatever you want to call it. I'm fine with that. So who counted who identified the 16 and the 12 bar choruses? Is there anyone who I can't see now at the moment who wants to answer that?
I can answer, Luz.
Yes.
In letter A, it has the first chorus has 16 bars.
Yep.
Then B 12.
12. Absolutely.
C again. C 16.
Yeah.
D 12.
Yep.
Another one 12. D.
Yep.
And C 16.
That's it. Yeah. And that's sort of the basic framework. Of course, you can go to the changes and all that, but this is just the basic form that I want you to identify, and also to recognize that blues by no means was fixed 12 bars, but it changed a lot, and it was still recognized in that time as a blues form. Also, the person that wrote this tune, he wrote it as part of a sort of a theater part. So that also explains that it was people watching, going to the theater, and it was very much to perform a certain feeling. And that sort of also explains why the form is different. Did anyone listen to the musical structure as well? Is there anything that you observed?
What do you mean by musical structure?
Who are playing and how it is organized. So obviously it is focused on the voice, on the vocal part, but what happens in the background?
What I found
only
interesting. Yeah, sorry. Continue.
Felix.
Yeah, I wrote down that there is some kind of characteristic brass movement at the end of each part.
Right.
So I actually don't remember it, but it's written there.
Okay. And I see Paul, you are nodding.
Yeah. I had a comment also about the brass that I found the spectrum, like I'm having always this pitfall because I'm a sound engineer, so I'm starting these comments on spectral sound and stuff. But what I found striking compared to the other one was the bright sound overall, and that the orchestration was quite was not helping or something. Like it was a little bit exaggerating the brightness. So in a way that almost the lyrics were not intelligible anymore. So I could not hear the lyrics that well. But of course, this is also a very old recording, so it's really nitpicking to bash on a recording from 100 years ago. But so that was interesting for me. But
okay, I always like it when people bring their own sort of expertise and own sets of ears. So you are listening to that spectral and timbre. So do you know anything of recording techniques in the 1920s? We will discuss it later as well.
Well, what I know is that usually this is on a wax written down on a wax roll. So usually this is just a maybe even a gramophone horn in front of the orchestra. So it's just one microphone, you could say. So it's like if you bash on this or if you're nitpicking on this, it's like impossible because they set it in front of it and that's it. So they don't have any control. So
no. So the balance was based on the position within the space, because there was indeed just one horn and they were sitting in front of that and that depended. So sometimes the soloist would move. But then, of course, they had to be very silent in doing so. There are some great. It's recorded later than this, but there's a nice film of Duke Ellington that you can probably find on YouTube, where Duke Ellington's orchestra demonstrates how recording technology works, and it's a great collaboration because Duke Ellington by that time was quite famous, but he owed a large part of his fame due to radio, but also recording techniques. So it was really a collaboration between a star and using these new technologies to benefited them both, the recording company, but also the musicians. So nice for you to know that. Also, what our ears are probably less used to now than they were getting used to in the early 20s was the collective improvisation, which was very much and became a much more part of the practice. So what you will maybe notice in the recording is that there's a front line and a back line. So front line of musicians, typically clarinets, for example, and trombones, that play basically broken chords as part of a way of responding to the vocalist. And then you have the back line, what we would now call probably a rhythm section that plays more the harmonic structures and the rhythmic structures, the bass. So there would be a front and a back line. And to us, it may sound a little bit noisy with all these different things going on, but it's a way of collective improvisation. And in the 60s and 70s, people like Jerry Mulligan and Chet Baker would start to bring back sort of the collective improvisation, but then with smaller ensembles, but by cutting out the piano, which gave them more room to play these chords. Right, so a small ensemble, collective improvisation, front line, back line. The clarinet would typically play the more sort of virtuoso lines. The trombones and the lower register instruments would typically stay closer to the harmonic chords. Paul, was there anything else you noted in terms of timbre or because I'm interested to know?
You're talking about the second.
No, still Crazy Blues. But if you want to say something about the Empty Dead Blues, then.
Well, I tried to be more musical the second time. So what I wrote down is that, in my opinion, it was more rhythmic, the sound or the feel, maybe because it had more rhythmic instruments like the piano, and I could hear the bass more. And I had a guitar with question mark. I don't know if there was a guitar, but I heard something like a sort of percussion instrument.
Which one are you talking about now?
This is the Crazy Blues. No, the other one.
The second one.
Yeah, the second one. So I would say that the arrangement was more rhythmic than the Crazy Blues. But I didn't write anything down about Spectrum. So.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, so let's go to the Empty Bed Blues then. So again, this was very much about the song lyrics. So did anyone listen to it? It's a classic blues for many reasons. We've been talking last week about the classic blues and the features of the classic blues. Who can tell me about something about blues lyrics? What is a typical classic blues form in terms of singing and structure, and also related to content? Does anyone have an idea? What happens to blues?
Maybe complaining and then repeating this over all the bars. I would say it like this.
Yeah, so it was an expression or a way of releasing and talking about your emotions and the pressures. So that's certainly an aspect of it. Do you know where the lyrics of this song was about?
About the Empty Bed Blues now? No.
Yeah, the Empty Bed Blues.
No, I don't have it in mind.
So it was obviously about an empty bed and how she was left by her husband, and then how she how will I say this? How she discovers drinking coffee and grinding her coffee as a way of replacing her husband. And she said about the coffee grinder, he knows how to thrill me, and he thrills me night and day. He's got a new way of loving, almost takes my breath away. And the coffee grinder is so sweet that she told her girlfriend Lou. And from the way she's raving, she must have gone and tried it too, the coffee grinder. So this obviously was part also of a sort of entertainment. It was not the blues as it was on the plantation, where it was really about suffering and expressing your suffering, but it was also about entertaining an audience with some naughty lyrics. But important to know about the classic blues is that indeed the first phrase is always repeated. So, for example, the first phrase is, I woke up this morning with an awful aching head. That's the statement. Then there's an emphasis, so it is repeated. I woke up this morning with an awful aching head. And then comes the explanation. And the explanation, my new man had left me just a room and an empty bed. So this is a typical blues form where you have three parts: statement, emphasis, explanation. Also, this is a specific type of meter, which we call iambic pentameter. No need to remember this, but this was a type of metric line that was used in traditional English poetry and verse drama. So again, there were different traditions coming together in the blues form. So important to know: statement, emphasis, explanation, and of course it also connects to a traditional 12-bar blues form that allows for 4 phrases or 4 bars. So also note the connection between what is being sung and the form it takes. You have probably all heard that this is a typical 12-bar blues form, so it's much more straightforward than the first example. Let's see. Okay. Is there anyone who wants to, Antonio, for example, what did you have in terms of form with the anti-bad blues?
I have that is a regular classic blues, I mean, with 5 chorus.
Yep.
Of 12 bars each other, so, and nothing else. I mean, the song is longer, right? Because there is like, I listened the whole recording. There are like 6 or 7 chorus more with a link in between.
Right. Yeah. But what you listened to the 5 times, that was right. Was there an introduction?
Yes, of 4 bars again.
4 bars. Anything else in terms of how it was organized musically?
No.
Anyone else? The role of the trombone?
Yes, actually, the trombone was doing the response to Bessie's singing. So basically, there was just a piano in a rag style, or maybe stride style. I don't really know much. Maybe rag, and then there was the trombone that was being played almost in a sarcastic way. So always responding very crying out or almost mocking with Bessie.
Okay, yeah.
Not mocking her, but played in such a way that seemed.
All right. I didn't give it that interpretation, but I like it. But indeed, there was a call and response, and this is obviously very important. It wasn't invented in that era. It was part of a long tradition of call and response, which is also part of musical practice in the church, for example. But call and response patterns are really important in this case between the vocalist and the trombone player. And another element of what we could identify as the classic blues is that there was a mix of blues singers and later jazz instrumentalists, so who would improvise much more. All right, so that about Bessie Smith. Just to remind you of the Crazy Blues, the first tune of Mamie Smith, she was a huge star in the 1920s. She was part of what we call race, or what was known as race records by that time. So it was a new sort of market that was discovered by the recording agencies. That was black artists or African American artists for African American audiences. And only later in the 1950s, after the Second World War, this label, the name of Race Records, was replaced by Rhythm and Blues by a guy called Jerry Wexler. And then it's also started to change, that you would have African American artists more playing for white audiences, or African American music played by white artists, for example. So that would be mixed much more. So these were the tunes of that belong to one class. Are there any more questions about this? Everything clear? Then we go to New Orleans, what we have been discussing last week. And there were 3 tunes that I asked you to listen to. So we are actually discussing 6 tunes today. The first one was Louisiana Swing from 1924 by Pyrrhon's New Orleans Orchestra. The question was, this tune can be seen to represent the transition from ragtime to jazz. Why? Please give the form of the tune. Let's start with the form. Who wants to give his or her answer? Daniel, what did you write down?
Yeah, actually, I didn't listen much for the form, but I wrote like there's a lot of instruments present, like typical from a ragtime band, and also the syncopation, I think, that's present. But many of the sections in this tune seem to be composed or arranged. And like, yeah, it seems to me there's not that much of collective improvisation, at least in the first sections. But then later on, yeah, I can hear some improvisation, like simple improvisation around the harmony. So I think at least there's 2 instruments improvising at the same time. And yeah, maybe that's why it's more like kind of the transition between ragtime and jazz. I don't know.
All right. When you say that the 2 instruments that are improvising around the improvisation, can you say something more about that?
I don't know. I can't remember very clearly, but yeah, I think one of them was doing like more like broken chords. And the other one, I don't know if it was a violin or something that was a higher pitch, and it had kind of, in sometimes I think some bending notes and like bending pitches and things that are more what we said in other lessons, like from the African tradition, right?
Yeah, so pitch bending. What I liked about when you were explaining the form was that you said that it seemed arranged, and this is a sort of nuance that is always good to make. When we talk about improvisation or arranged or composed, we are never sure whether something is improvised or written down. Usually in these early recordings, either, for example, solos would be written down or memorized in advance. There are quite a few examples of, a bit later, Charlie Parker, who has different versions of a solo that are pretty similar. So people would memorize their improvisations because it was just so expensive to do multiple recordings. So it's always good to make this distinction and say that, well, it sounds improvised. Is it really? And then you note the 2 soloists, where you have a more melodic line. And, for example, in the 3rd chorus, the trombone player plays indeed broken chords. And this is something called tailgating. So I'll add it in the chat, tailgating. That was known in that time, where it's basically playing contrapuntal lines. So you could say that, especially there's a sort of transition from ragtime to more jazz within the tune itself. It starts basically as a sort of syncopated ragtime style. Someone of you observed that it was a bit more vertical, whereas the jazz timing is a bit more horizontal. I think that's also a nice way of describing it. it's more with a bit more of a different drive than ragtime would be. So syncopate or ragtime style. And what you also hear within this tune, but also within the transition from ragtime to jazz, is from 2-beat feel to 4-beat in a bar. So that's quite a distinction. So that this is something you can identify here. And the move towards 4 beats, the emphasis on four beats in a bar, is also emphasized in this particular song by the banjo that plays in fourth in the second part of the tune. And later that will be replaced, of course, by the guitar. The violin is still very much part of the early jazz style practice. So here it also has its place. Does anyone remember why the violin was part of these early orchestras?
Had it to do with the Irish influence or not? There was something you mentioned in a lesson about the Irish influence. But
well, that was sort of the reason it was part. It was part of sort of folk music traditions, but also the sort of what I call the light classics that were part of the repertoire. And important, there was a huge competition in the 20s between orchestras and gigs. So you had to be very versatile. And a violin enabled you to also play or make references to classical repertoire. So these orchestras were typically meant for dancing and entertainment, as most of you have observed as well. I hear myself in an echo. So can you please mute your mic again? I can put it off. Okay. So it's important to realize that there was huge competition, and a violin enabled you to play different repertoire. I did quite some archival research on early jazz orchestras in the Netherlands, and if you are ever at the Rembrandt Square in Amsterdam, which is one of the most well-known squares, you will see Café de Kroon. It's a huge building still there. Every Monday night, all the jazz artists, which were considered the lowest of the lowest, even below circus artists, they would go there together with impresarios, and newspaper report on these events where they would try and get gigs, and preferably of a few months, and they compare it to a stocking market or live trade, but then it's not sheep and pigs, but it's jazz musicians, so it's quite funny to read. But there was a huge, also in Europe, huge competition, and you had to be very versatile and play a lot of different genres and styles. So that was why the violin is often part of these early orchestras. Right, in terms of form, it starts with an introduction of 8 bars with 2 beats to the measure, played by the tuba and the trombone, with instrumental breaks. Then there's a theme of 16 bars, basically A1, A2, in which the melody is played by the cornet. Then there's a second theme, 16 bars, that is repeated 2 times with a call and response between the trombone and first the full orchestra, and then later a call and response between the trombone and the clarinet. Then there's a bridge of 4 bars that leads to basically another part of 3 choruses of each 32 bars. So in the first chorus, there's the lead melody is played by the violin, and with a sort of secondary melody played by the clarinet. in the second chorus, the lead melody is played by the cornet, and it is syncopating the melody. And there are counter melodies played by the violin, the alto saxophone, and the clarinet. The alto saxophone is quite unusual. It wasn't quite a fixed part of the early jazz orchestra as we know it now. Then in the third chorus, then there's again the cornet playing the melody and the trombone tailgating, so playing contrapuntal bass lines. Right, so that's about the Louisiana Swing. Then we go to Jerry Roll Morton's Wolverine Blues from 1927. And the question here was... how would you describe the characteristics and performance of this tune? So it is important to know that Jerry Roll Morton sort of exemplifies the transition from playing ragtime to jazz. And ragtime was much more fixed, less improvisation than jazz. Considering the time, I'm just going to read what I have here, and you can compare it to your own answers. So there are some things that you might have observed is that it's not the fastest tune. So ragtime is usually a bit slower than a later stride piano, which is a bit more faster, which is also meant to be virtuoso. We're going to talk about it in our Harlem Renaissance class. Later on. There's a strong backbeat is played by the drummer, Baby Dodds. And Jerry Roll Morton also integrates blues elements into the music, which was less usual in ragtime then and became more part of stride piano later on. And the ragtime is sort of composed variations on melodies, and these variations become more and more improvised. Also think of ragtime as a bit more riff-like compositional structure in opposition to longer phrases that become more the practice within early jazz and stride piano. So the ragtime is composed, it's not really fast. Stride piano is very extrovert with giant leaps with the left hand. And so you can sort of hear that transition in the Wolverine Blues as well. All right, we are going to the first jazz recording. I read some nice answers about the question was what was the main purpose of this music? So let's start with that question. Felix, what did you have there as an answer? What was the main purpose?
Didn't answer the question. The purpose.
Okay, you make a guess.
Maybe
who can help Felix out?
Yeah, there are 20 more of us. Not only the 5 having the camera on, right?
Yeah.
I'm kind of lost on which tune, because I'm a bit confused. We're talking about the tune on the 12 slide, right?
Yeah, well, the last tune now.
Okay.
The tune with the Dixieland Jazz Band.
Well, for me, I wrote down Party Time. So I think it was like very danceable. It was also a little bit unserious in a good way, not like a bad way. So like joking around with sounds, animal sounds. So really like an entertainment for people. I could see people dancing. That was really, for me, the most prominent thing, I would say.
Yeah, So important indeed. Among the many sounds that were sort of experimented with was the clippity cloppity of on the percussion, sometimes made with coconut sounds or coconut, honking automobile horns. All these sort of modern sounds were integrated into the music. So it was a way of also attracting audiences, entertaining audience, indeed, sort of party times. There's little variety between the choruses, so that enabled also the people to dance. It's easier to dance on a more or less continuing form and rhythm than when it keeps on changing or when it is really complicated. So usually these songs would have, for example, very fast tempos also to entertain. The cymbal crash is something that you will hear a lot at the end of certain phrases or at the end of a tune. And other so-called novelty effects. So the imitations of animals, indeed. The use of cowbells and all kind of effects to entertain. So again, I think that is important to realize that why this music was written or why it made sense to also record it and why it was there. Also note the collective polyphonic frontline playing. So again, the usually improvisation of multiple contrapuntal lines by the front line. So the clarinets typically and trombones, sometimes alto saxophone, and sometimes the violin as well. So that's also very much part of this practice. Felix, you're quite right that now I've mainly been talking to the people who have had their camera on. Are there other people who want to add something or want to discuss their answer?
Yeah, I have a question actually.
Yes.
About the last tune. The genre, wasn't it also being played at funerals, but in a positive way to remember the life of someone that died? Or because I did a little bit of research and I just to ask if it's right.
Yes, it would typically be also in second lining. So the practice where you would have a parade to the funeral, so funeral parade. And second lining was, you probably have seen the parades with the umbrellas and people playing, improvising, so you could be part of that. My guess is that it wouldn't have that many novelty effects because that was really to entertain, and jazz and improvised music was part of funerals to celebrate someone's life and so to celebrate the life of the deceased. So yes, it was also part of that sort of practice, and especially on the streets of New Orleans. Eva, Luna, did you have other? So you did some research on this. What were your other findings?
Yeah, something that already has been said about that it was supposed to be dancing music and music for more partying.
Yeah, and obviously in second lining it's usually a tuba or obviously an instrument that you can walk and play at the same time. So double bass is not a part of the practice for obvious reasons, but it's good to observe these differences as well. Also, I'm not aware of violin being very much of second line practice, for example. Okay, right. Are there any questions about this music? So please listen to it again and again observe sort of the differences? Would you recognize this as jazz or identify it as jazz or not at all? Why? Why not? Jazz, as we have sort of established in the first class, it doesn't really. There's no essence to jazz. It's something that keeps on changing, and the meaning keeps on changing. So it's very difficult to say there's a really core to jazz, although there are things that we identify and can have huge discussions of whether something should be called jazz. I'm always very interested to read those discussions with Kenny G on top of my list of fascinations of the discussion of the boundaries of what is and what is not jazz. Right, it's almost time. Next week, you have a holiday. So I am in Amsterdam currently working with a former Olympic ice skater. And he says the most important thing to when you do deliberate practice, as you do, and you are not practicing the ice skates, but practicing your instrument, the most important thing to do is to rest. So please use your break to have a proper break, to have your brain muscles release and recover, and make sure you have a fresh start after the autumn break. I'm probably the only one who's going to tell you. The rest is just going to say, no, practice. Yes, practice, but also take a break and stare out of the window and close your eyes for a minute. Right. You may have heard my children in the background because we in Amsterdam have a holiday this week. I wish you all a very pleasant break. If you cannot make it to my classes or if you cannot make the assignments, please communicate. We're like a band, not showing up to rehearsals or just walking off stage is not a nice thing to do. All right. So I wish you a nice week and I see you again in 2 weeks. The Azimuth schedule is the schedule that rules. So we'll see you then. All right. Bye-bye.